Welcome. This is Hugh Massey from DNA Behaviour again. In our prior sessions on the financial DNA natural behaviour discovery process and our reporting, I focused on the individual reports. We looked at the individual reports for Helen Jones and then her advisor, Chris Coddington. Now we're going to look at the comparison report. The importance of looking at the comparison report is to bring out the differences between the client and the advisor, or between a husband and wife, or between family members. So in this setting here, for the moment, as far as this session is concerned, it's Helen Jones as the client, she's the engager, and it's Chris Coddington as the strategist. And we've got the first of two comparison reports. So this one is the financial behaviour comparison report. It's in one page. It's just meant to provide a snapshot. There is a more detailed comparison report I'll bring up in a minute. I believe one of the biggest challenges for advisors and also for leaders is identifying the behavioural differences and then knowing how to manage them. And that's very difficult to do if you don't know what they are. So the idea of these reports is to put them directly out there in terms of these differences. So we can see in 5 core areas, we address the differences. So we look at the risk behaviour. So for Helen as the client, she's 73 and Chris is 99. So this is the percentage score. These scores are the same as the financial behaviour reports that I talked about in an earlier session. So Chris is more of a risk taker than 99% of the population and Helen 73%. So pretty strong in terms of taking risks. And this is relatively a good match between advisor and client, although Chris could put Helen into some investments potentially that involve taking more risk than what she should. That's one of the fatal flaws for advisors, is that clients eat the behaviour of the advisor. So this is a good example of that. There, so Chris just needs to be careful in terms of the risk taking that he puts in front of Helen. But they would be talking the same common language in terms of taking risks. In terms of the financial relationship management, Chris's strength as an advisor is more about solutions, bringing the ideas to the client, but not necessarily ongoing, personal, highly engaging relationship management. He's got to work harder at that. So Helen's going to require that. She's going to delegate to the advisor. Chris, being the more solution-orientated advisor, more wanting to be in control and direct the process, this is a big gap. So she's going to want somewhat more of a social approach. He's going to want to take it and run, and he's going to need to learn to engage Helen in conversations when needed, touch base with her, give her plenty of time when she calls up, make the process more connective. So if the financial planning process was to fail between Helen and Chris, this would be one area because they're so different. And then, in terms of financial planning management, budgets, Helen is not budgetary orientated, whereas Chris is quite structured financially. Budgets would be something that's a normal thing for him. But what, again, he needs to do is to not be judgmental of her in relation to that. He needs to adapt his language so that she hears it more of a spending plan rather than a budget, and not feel too tied in. Although at the end of the day, Chris might be delivering the tough medicine that Helen may need to build her finances. And then from a goal perspective, Chris is going to be pretty bottom line, goal driven, ambitious. So he's got to remember that Helen's going to be more lifestyle focused in that area. Talking about goals is probably not going to be as comfortable for her as talking about desires. So again, Chris has got to change his language. So what this report's bringing out is the need for the advisor to change their language, change their approach for the client, and to understand that not everybody is the same. And even though that financial planning these days is about goal-based financial planning, talking about goals and pursuing goals is not the same thing for every person. And for some, it's more about desires and their values, and just having that conversation differently. And so this is where, again, an advisor like Chris needs to dial back their bottom line approach and make it more relational for someone like Helen. And then a strength for Chris is going to be pretty rational, and I would be expecting him to, as long as she's listening and they're engaged in the financial planning relationship, keep her away from making silly decisions under pressure. She'll be more emotional under pressure. When markets go up and down, life events happen, and he's going to be more consistent in that respect and not have emotional impulses. So just wrapping up again, what we can see here between Helen and Chris is quite a lot of differences, and they need to be navigated. Chris is the leader of the advisory relationship, needs to be the one to adapt to Helen. But the more Helen is aware of these differences and to realize that Chris is bringing a lot of strengths to her, she needs to accept some of perhaps his more results-driven behaviour to get that great outcome. But this is important to understand these differences, and for Chris eventually to bring a team to the table to help out Helen. So now I'm going to show you a more detailed comparison report that has more of the cues for adapting the behaviour between Chris and Helen, and this can be used, a very useful report. It addresses it more in terms of the factor language that we have in our more detailed summary report and the wealth mentoring report that you've heard before. So we know Chris is more pioneering, goal-driven, more skeptical, and Helen's more outgoing and creative. So the more directional approach from Chris, more goal-driven, to the more wanting to have a free-flowing conversation, being more creative, being more brainstorming. We can immediately see the differences between the two. It's graphically seen here. They're opposites in a lot of areas, and I'd always emphasize that we want to understand the differences, but also the similarities can be points of issue at times as well. But we can see here a couple of the biggest differences are at the top. Chris is more take charge. He's going to want to take control of the advisory relationship. Helen's going to fit in, but she also needs to be invited to speak up. It's her life, and she needs to have the courage to talk up against Chris and push back a bit here and there and say what she wants, and he needs to soften it up to allow her to do that. She's going to be more outgoing, so she's going to talk a lot at times. Chris, being more reserved, will be overwhelmed with that, being the more reflective person. So he's got to make it a bit more lively for her, smile more, and engage in the conversation. They're both fast-paced and results-orientated, which is good. There's a difference in the structure here. So Chris will be more planned. I think that's good for a client that's more spontaneous in providing that structure and ensuring that it's an orderly process, and they know where they're going as they want to build their finances. And then we can see the differences down here. Now, I think the big one is Chris being extremely goal-driven, could be more judgmental of Helen, who's more balanced life approach. And then what we do is down here, we bring out the differences, between the two. So we show their quality life attitudes, how they're looking at the financial planning process. So there's Chris at the top and then Helen. So we'll start to see the difference in words. Again, Chris can use this report to ask Helen questions. This information is in the summary report, but it's laid out again here. So Chris could just use this report to ask Helen key questions about what she wants in the financial planning process, and then using these insights tables as well that we've been through in the summary report. I think the part that's very important here is showing both of them how to modify their behavior to work well with each other. And so these cues here provide those insights. So this is where this report becomes very valuable in providing the action points for them to adapt to each other. And then again, the compatibility. So at one level, Chris could be a great advisor for Helen because of his more goal-driven approach, more structure, take charge, getting her solutions that she needs. But at the same time, once the planning is set up, his more down to business approach might be harder for someone that wants, you know, to engage a bit more in conversation, to be a bit more free-flowing, is going to trust that the details are being taken care of. So this is where Chris probably perhaps needs to bring a more relational team member to the table to keep Helen engaged, make her feel comfortable to ring up and ask questions. So, you know, I'm big on advisors choosing the ideal client for them. Not every client's going to be easy for them to work with from a relational perspective. And so this is where building a team for the advisor is important. And also understanding the difference between husband and wives and where the connection strengths and struggles are going to be. So the comparison report, again, both the comparison reports that I've been through today are very powerful in bringing out the differences. And I believe understanding the differences is the difference between success and failure for the advisor and ultimately for the client. And this is true within the family unit as well. If you can master the differences and build more alignment and cohesiveness, then there's going to be far more success in the planning. It's not just about the technical planning, it's about the human element, and the differences is reflective of that. And we need to bring the human beings together and unlock the blockages for there to be great success.